Sarah Mack has over a decade of experience as a histotechnician with main focus in preparation, processing, and analysis of both calcified and soft tissues of the musculoskeletal system. In addition to providing consulting, advice, and assistance to clients of the histology, biochemistry, and molecular imaging core, Sarah serves as its manager, supervising all histology-based projects within the Center of Musculoskeletal Research. Sarah supervises the generation of musculoskeletal tissue biorepositories and oversees the creation and maintenance of reagent stocks and standard protocols. She provides hands-on assistance in the preparation of histological tissues, including decalcification, automated paraffin processing, orientation before embedding, and sectioning of paraffin and frozen tissue. Sarah currently serves as chair of the Hard Tissue Committee for the National Society of Histotechnology and as president of the New York State Histotechnological Society. She's been an active member in both societies for more than 15 years, providing information and knowledge to histologists that work in both scientific and clinical lab settings. So it's a real pleasure to bring you to our microphone. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, Rick. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you all for attending. I'd like to get started today and talk to you about decalcification and what you need to know. So the learning objectives for today is to understand different decalcification methods, to choose the appropriate decalcification method for your sample, determine the appropriate time needed for your decalcification, and review the chemical process of decalcification and how it works. So most of us already know that decalcification is the term used for, removing mineral from bone or other calcified tissue, such as cartilage. This allows for proper processing and sectioning of specimens to be used for histological analysis. There are different kinds of decalcification methods used in paraffin-embedded formalin-fixed samples. You can decalcify with acids such as formic acid, hydrochloric acid, and nitric acid. Or there's chelators, which are EDTA, tetrasodium, at various concentrations with varying pHs. Acids can vary. Some can be very, very strong and harsh, such as hydrochloric or nitric acids. At concentrations used up to 10%, they're used for rapid decalcification. These are really quick. You can also buy rapid decalcifying agents. They're available commercially. I know many labs make them, but I also know lots that purchase them because it's easier. Formic acid is the most commonly used acid decalcifying agent. It varies from 5 to 20% formic acid and can be used in-house or from an 88% stock formic acid. Formic acid is available commercially. Immunocal from Stat Labs is one that is commonly used. It's a 5% formic acid concentration. Immunocal is very gentle, but it's also quick to decalcify your tissue, and it's a great low percentage to use, concentration. So when we're talking about decalcification methods, I mentioned some acids. Now I'm going to go on and talk about chelators. A chelator, such as EDTA, tetrasodium, at various concentrations and varying pHs. EDTA tetrasodium, a chelating agent, removes calcium, magnesium, iron from bone and calcified cartilage. EDTA takes longer to decalcify compared to acid decalcifying agents. However, it's much, much gentler on the tissue. In our lab, that is our standard go-to. We use EDTA. Actually, we don't even provide formic acid anymore. So when we do EDTA, we use two different variations. One is the WebG method, and that is quicker than a standard 14% EDTA. Both of those recipes are included in the end of the slideshow. EDTA, although it takes longer, you have to pay very, very close attention to it because of it taking longer. It can have a bad effect on the proteoglycan staining by removing the proteoglycans from the extracellular matrix of cartilage and bone. Now, if you're doing a stain and you want to quantify that, if you've over-decalcified, and if you've over-decalcified your sample and affected the proteoglycans, well, how will you measure that if the samples are going to vary? So grossing is a critical step in the decalcifying process. Samples should be grossed down to the minimal size. Larger samples take longer to decalcify, obviously, which can damage cell and tissue morphology. So we actually right now in our lab have samples coming in from a surgeon, but they're cadaver shoulder rotators and rotator cuffs, and they're humerus and rotator cuffs. So what we're doing is taking a larger section of these samples, starting to decalcify them for 1 week, and then grossing them so that for another week, and they're easier to handle, and we find that we aren't damaging the tissue. If a sample is not grossed properly, they will not fix well, which means they won't decalcify well. If they don't decalcify well, they're not going to process well. They won't cut well, and it's just a downward spiral, the domino effect. If things aren't grossed in the beginning properly, the whole process is going to be terrible. So in our lab, our main focus is animal research. We do a lot of mouse work. We also do some rat, larger specimens come in too, but mainly our bread and butter is the mouse hind limb. So when we gross this, we remove all the skin, the fur, and the muscle tissue, except for that which is immediately around the joint, because we are the Center for Musculoskeletal Research within the Department of Orthopedics. We are very interested in the joints, whether it be arthritis or some sort of manipulation. So we need to leave extra tissue around the joint to support it. And we cut off both ends, the distal and proximal end of the femur and tibia, in order to allow the fixation to penetrate for 3 days. We do a 72-hour fix, and then we will do a good rinse. Here is an example of a gross hind limb with the extra tissue around the joint. And they will cut the proximal and distal ends off the bone and remove the tibia, but this is just a picture I had where I wanted to show the extra tissue around the joint of the hind limb. Here's a femur fracture where you can see at both ends of the femur there's some extra tissue and muscle. That's because it's necessary in order to hold the femur fracture together so it won't break when we're embedding or cutting, sectioning the sample. Other than that, that's about the biggest femur I'm going to get in my lab, it makes it very easy for us to decalcify, where I know in many clinical labs you guys don't have that luxury, but we do. So as I said, fixation is a critical step in the decalcification process. If samples aren't fixed well, they also won't decalcify well. We fix all of our samples in 10% neutral-buffered formalin. Sometimes there's very minimally, though, we use fresh 4% paraformaldehyde according to a timetable that will be posted. Postnatal and adult mouse limbs, we fix for 3 days, like I mentioned, to 72 hours in MBF or 4% paraformaldehyde. You can do 4 degrees or you can do room temperature. It really doesn't matter. I do, however, switch out the MBF daily as well as the paraformaldehyde. Postnatal and adult spines fixed for 3 days or 72 hours in 10% MBF or 4% paraformaldehyde at 4 degrees or, like I said, room temperature. It's really up to you. As I said, I really suggest that you change your MBF daily and definitely use fresh paraformaldehyde. When you're using a decalcifying agent or anything, whether you're fixing or decalcifying, you should have a 20 to 1% ratio of solution according to your sample size in order for better infiltration. We prefer to place our samples in containers with magnetic stir bars and stir lightly, or we put them on a rocker so that they agitate. I have found this to be critical. We do this with all of our samples. We don't just leave them on a shelf to see what will happen. They rock and agitate. It speeds up the process of decalcification. Here's a picture of some of you may recognize these. These are old microwave processing vessels that are on the stir bars. That's actually, we put our cassettes in the racks with our decalcifying solution and let them stir for generally about a week, 7 days for the hind limbs. We change our solution every 5 days. And it's very important with all of your solutions in histology, which you all know, that you change them regularly and keep them fresh. So post-fixation is something that I'm big on. I post-fix many of our samples after they've been decalcified. In our hands, it improves the cell morphology and yields crisper staining results. I have seen it. I've had people say, well, we don't think that this is the case. And, you know, I don't have any real evidence other than in our hands we have seen that it makes a difference. And it's also sometimes, as we are a fee-for-service core, and sometimes the samples that come to us have already been decalcified. And so somebody will say, this is fixed, it's been fixed for 3 days, we decalcified it, now we just want you to process it, embed it, and section it. Well, we only hope that what they're telling us is the honest truth, that yes, we did fix our samples for 3 days and 10% neutral buffered formalin. We changed the formalin daily, and now we used EDTA for 7 days or 2 weeks. But that's not always the case. So I try very hard, which doesn't always work, but I ask that people bring samples to us right out of fix, and then we go from there in the process forward till we cut and stain at the end. That's not always an option. So if something comes to me, even if they say, we've decalcified it, it's this, it's that, I still will put it in 10% NBF for a post-fixation step. And for larger samples, focusing on joint injury or manipulations, muscle and connective tissue are not completely removed. After decalcification, these samples are post-fixed in 10% NBF using various times dependent on size and rate. 10% NBF penetrates tissue. Obviously, decalcification is going to take longer with a larger sample, as well as fixation is going to take longer with a larger sample. 10% NBF penetrates tissue rapidly, but fixes slowly, about 1 millimeter per hour. So that really needs to sink in. Most of us already know this, though, that it penetrates tissue rapidly, but fixes slowly. Therefore, the center of the bone may not be completely fixed. And we see that a lot on stuff that has come into us, as I said, that, oh, we fixed this and we've already decalcified it. If it's not, we have to go by what they say, but when we're cutting and staining at the end, we can tell that it wasn't a 3-day fix or the standard time of decalcification in which we do. You should thoroughly rinse EDTA out of all of your samples. We place ours under running water for several hours. And as long as your samples have been fixed proper, this isn't a problem. You know, nothing swells, but they have to be fixed a good amount of time in order to do this process of running water. And we do. We run a rubber hose right off our spigot into our sample container and just let the water flow for probably at least 3 hours with samples before processing. When rinsing out tissue after acid decalcifying, neutralizers must be used. So if you're just rinsing EDTA out of something, a chelator, you're fine. You don't need to follow up by a neutralizer. But if you've used an acid, you have to neutralize the sample by bringing the pH back down. So that's important. And you can't just run your sample underwater and hope that it's going to work, because the pH has been affected, which is going to affect your stain, is going to affect any immunohistochemistry or enzymatic staining that you hope to do in the future. So due to the amount of salt-containing solutions that bone is subjected to, it must be rinsed thoroughly before processing. So the salts start maybe engrossing in PBS, and then in fixing in 10% neutral buffered formalin. And then you're going to your decalcifying agent. If you use EDTA, there's a lot of salt. And if you do not rinse your samples out, when you change your processor at the end of how many ever runs your lab does, when you're dumping the ethanol, you're going to see that there's a lot of salts going down the drain. Our processor starts in 70% ethanol. We don't even have neutral buffered formalin on our processor, but we still see the salt. So, I mean, if you have MBF as the first station of your processor, you'll see more salts. But however you choose to do it in your lab, if it works for you, keep it that way. Acid decalcifying agents must be changed daily. That's because they break down quicker than the EDTAs or the chelators. Acid decalcifying agents must be checked often as the rate they decalcify varies. EDTA does not need to be changed daily. Like I said, we change every 5 days, and most of the time we do a 7-day decal, so we'll do a Monday or a Tuesday and a Friday change for our samples. So the EDTA that we use is a 14% EDTA tetrasodium with a pH of 7.3 to 7.6. This is the WebG Kimmel that protocol I was talking about. We love that in our lab. We use a regular 14% EDTA with the same pH that we have. So the WebG is brought to pH with using glacial acetic acid. I have to think about that. What smells like vinegar every time we use it? And that is a quicker EDTA. It's at still 14%. It's a pH of 7.3 to 7.6. But it is a much quicker EDTA. It can decalcify samples in 7 days, whereas another 14% EDTA tetrasodium with the same pH we use in this lab, we bring down with hydrochloric acid to pH. It takes up to 2 weeks. So I'm a huge fan of the WebG, and that, like I said, that's going to be a protocol that you'll find at the end of the slideshow. So when you're going to decalcify your sample, you really have to think about your end result. What do I want to do with this sample? Am I going to want to do Sappho stain because I'm going to want to look at the cartilage and I want to see the tide, or am I just going to do this and do these samples and just do a regular H&E, and then I'm going to do immunohistochemistry at the end? Well, you need to know exactly what it is that you're going to do, because if you use acid decalcifying agents, they're known to be fast, and they remove fast and effective forms of removing calcium. They can be really harsh. They can destroy enzymes. They can destroy cell morphology. Acid decalcifying agents have a low pH that can interfere with enzymes, antigens, and stain quality. As I already said, I said that prior. Formic acid is a lower grade acid. It allows for good cellular detail and works well with the common skeletal stains that we use. So you can use formic acid if you're doing Alcium blue hematoxylin orange D stain. But like I said, we actually, since I'd say in the last 6 months, we haven't used formic acid in our lab at all. We are strictly an EDTA decalcifying lab. So there's, rapid decalcifying agents may be necessary in clinical labs for quick results. In our research lab, we don't have to have quick results. Obviously, we want to get it, bring stuff in and turn it around and get it out as soon as we can. But in clinical labs, if that was your bone and it was sitting in, EDTA for 2 weeks on the stir plate, that's kind of disturbing. But the rapid decalcifying agents, they are very harsh on samples, and they decrease cell preservation, and they also make so that the staining quality is poor. And if you're doing immunohistochemistry, again, this could be a big problem. And which decalcifying agents work best for IHC, immunohistochemistry? Well, some people will tell you buffered formic acid with sodium citrate, or the 14% EDTA. Well, what I will tell you is whatever decalcifying agents you are using in your lab, you better make sure that you do a trial run on the immunohistochemistry before, on your antibody, and have some extra slides before you do the whole deal, so that you haven't wasted reagent and time. We do lots of preliminary work here. Oh. Sorry, that got stuck. Okay. So again, we're still talking about how you choose your decalcifying agent wisely. When performing enzymatic stains, such as tetrate-resistant acid phosphatate, TRAP, we do a lot of TRAP in our lab, and beta-galactoside, beta-gal, you should use EDTA. Just because if you use formic acid or any of the other acids, there's going to be a lot of missing stain. It may not even stain at all. You won't get any of the enzymes. Decalcifying at 4 degrees for IHC or immunofluorescence to preserve antigens and fluorescence, that's very important. And if you're doing, if you're even doing laser capture microdissection, you're going to want to make sure that either your decalcifying agent was purchased from a sterile environment or made in a sterile environment with, depth seawater, autoclaved, all sorts of things. It all goes back to knowing exactly what you want to see at the end. So keeping the calcifying time to a minimum is necessary. It's very important for lots of reasons, because we don't want to have all of our, samples sitting in here and people waiting and waiting for them. But we also know that the longer a sample sits in a solution, the enzymes will die. The pH and temperature sensitive. Antigen loss. Preserving antigens is essential for immunohistochemistry and antigen retrieval. So again, is this, should I keep this in 4 degree and change the solutions often and keep this a slope or keep it to a minimal amount of time for decalcifying? And the longer that your sample sits in a decalcifying agent, the worse results you'll have with proteoglycans. So cell loss and poor cell morphology are going to be a critical problem too if your samples have sat in a decalcifying agent for too long. So keeping decalcifying time to a minimum is necessary to prevent pore infiltration during processing, which will cause terrible sections. And if terrible sections is an issue, surface decalcifying may be an option. I don't even like to bring surface decalcifying up, but accidents happen. Whether it be somebody brings samples to you and say, I'd like to submit these samples to your core to have you process and embed and cut them. And I've already done the fixing and the decalcifying. All you have to do is process. Well, we hear that quite often. As a fee-for-service, people can bring in things that they've started along the way, and it saves them money. So I understand that. But it doesn't save them money if we get to the end and they have made their EDTA in their lab or got it from somebody else, went and bought it, and that's okay. You can buy it, you can make it your own in your own lab, but you have to make sure that the pH and the way that it was pH'd with what chemical are the same way that we do. Otherwise, when we go to cut these samples, we find that we're cutting into something that is just horrible. And it scratches, and there's still a whole bunch of mineral left in the sample. So how do you surface decal? Well, I don't know how you do it, but when we do it, we put a little bit of ammonia hydroxide in the top of a Petri dish or a bottom of a Petri dish, and then we let it sit not long. And I don't have an approximate time to tell you, but you're going to have to pay close attention to your samples in your lab by yourself and figure that out. But we we'll put a sample on ammonium hydroxide a little bit for maybe 30 seconds is where we would start. And then you have to rinse this sample off with water and then go ahead and cut it. Because if you aren't rinsing the ammonium hydroxide off your sample, you're dropping the pH substantially, and then your stains are going to be off because you're taking your sections from this ammonium hydroxide from, to water, to the microtome. But if you don't rinse it well enough, you're also contaminating your water bath, putting it on the slides. When you send your slides to be stained, you're going to see a whole lot of variable in the slides and the stains because of the surface decal. And like I said, I'm not a big fan, but sometimes that's the only thing you can do. We've actually had samples come to us where people have not decalcified them at all, and somehow that has come through the paperwork that, yes, we decalcified. So, okay, they decalcify, we rinse out the samples, and we'll process them, and then when we go to cut them, oh, these samples haven't been decalcified at all. Then you have to obviously back them up, go through a reverse processing step, put them into decalcification agents, and hope that everything will be okay. Obviously, reprocessing isn't something you want to do either, but it can be done. And if that's how you have to save your samples, that's what you have to do. So there's a weight testing that can be done on bone with a milligram balance. This is an accurate and quick decalcifying endpoint test. Weight in record sample weight prior to adding a decalcifying agent. So you weigh your sample, and then when the sample gains weight, they are decalcified. When calcium has been removed from the sample, it will take in water and increase in weight. Weigh EDTA samples daily and acid samples every 5 hours because they are so much quicker. Now, is it important to do this, a specific test, or sometimes, and honestly, I was taught to put a mouse hind limb between my thumb and forefinger and just bend it. And if it was spongy and it bent, then it was done. Well, done decalcifying. That's great. But how do I know that my little bend test feels the same on every specimen and every strain of mouse, or every, at age points? And it just, that became a problem. And we started to say, all right, we have to make sure that things are standardized in here, and how can we do this? What test should we do to make sure that everything is decalcified proper? This weight test is easy. Anybody can do that. X-ray will confirm if the calcium remains in the bone or not. We have that in our lab too. Not all labs have that luxury. A chemical test using ammonium oxalate will determine decalcification endpoints of acid. If calcium is present, a precipitate of calcium oxalate will form, indicating longer decalcification is required. Mechanical testing can be done on the bone by bending carefully to see flexibility. This is what I mentioned. And this is how we used to do it in our lab, but I don't recommend it. It can damage the bone, and it's not accurate. It varies between samples, and it varies between technicians. It varies between people. It's just, you can't keep that standard. And in science and research, we have to be able to replicate our everything that we've done. So obviously, that's not a good idea to try. So the take-home message here is that strong mineral acids such as hydrochloric or nitric acid at concentrations up to 10% are used for rapid decalcification. They remove calcium quickly and are considered harsh on tissue morphology. Formic acid, an organic acid, is commonly used and gentle on tissues. As I said, formic acid can be made in your lab, or it's also available commercially. EDTA is a chelating agent. That also can be, you can buy that commercially or make it in your lab at varying concentrations with varying pHs. I've seen an 8% EDTA all the way up to 20% EDTA. We use a standard 14% EDTA in our lab. Large tissue needs to be post-fixed to allow proper dehydration and infiltration during processing. I'm going to say all tissue in my lab, but in your lab you may only want to do the large tissue, or maybe you don't want to do any. I've just found that in our hands, post-fixation is a great help. If tissue is not grossed thoroughly, fix will not penetrate effectively. So this is, you can see I have a picture of those lovely dominoes on this slide. If tissue isn't grossed well, if the ends of the bone aren't cut off, the fix won't penetrate. If you leave skin on, say, mouse tail, because you've done something to the mouse tail and you're worried that if you fractured it, say, and you're worried that if you remove the skin on an early injury, it won't hold and maybe the callus will break, or, well, that's going to be a real bear to fix, decalcify, and excuse me, it's going to be a whole bear to do anything with, especially when it comes to cutting if you've left the skin on. Decalcifying will not be adequate if samples aren't grossed and fixed, as I said. Grossing, if something is grossed wonderfully but fixed for a shorter period of time, you're also going to have the same problem with your decalcifying agent. It's not going to work right, and your samples are not going to cut right, and it's just going to be so frustrating for the technician that's at the microtome. That's why we've post-fixed, as I've said, all of our samples, and it allows the proper dehydration and infiltration during processing. If any of these skips aren't right, or if any of these steps aren't done right, then you have the domino effect. Right here is a stain done on a mouse hind limb. It's the hematoxylin and eosin on the top, and you can see that the arrow is pointing to the arrows on the top for the hematoxylin and eosin is pointing to just the articular cartilage. And below, we have Alcium blue hematoxylin orange G. The top and the bottom are both done actually with formic acid as a decalcifying agent, and that would have been a 5-day decalcifying process. This is Alcium blue orange G done with decalcified with 14% EDTA, pH with glacial acetic acid to 7.36. I think that that's a pretty slide. Here is saffron O, fast green, and toluidine blue, fast green. Both of these are, again, all these pictures are mouse hind limbs, and the articular cartilage is what we're most interested in, and it is, both of these samples were decalcified with EDTA. References I would like to point out are on the slide. And my contact information is Sarah Mack at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Please don't hesitate. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'd be more than happy to help you. Thank you for attending. I'd like to remind everybody that one of my collaborators here at the University of Rochester, Laura Lee, will be giving a presentation in April. I hope you can attend and listen to her conference as well. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Wonderful presentation. We do actually have some questions. So let's go straight to our questions. First is, would you post-fix a bone marrow core sample after decalcification, the largest measuring 1.8 by 0.3 centimeters and smallest 0.2 by 0.2 centimeters? So 1.8 by 0.3 and 0.2 by 0.2.
That I probably would not post-fix. In my hands, I wouldn't. This is mainly for research and for mouse and any animal tissue. But as far as human bone marrow cores, I think that I would not post-fix that.
Okay, thank you. And next, how much weight should the specimen gain? A certain percentage of the original weight? That was around slide 29 or 30. I'm not sure exactly what that's referring to, but I think you do.
That is just, if it starts gaining weight at all, any weight at all, as soon as it starts gaining weight, you're going to notice. It's not a certain percentage because all sample sizes vary, and the amount of water that they'll intake as weight will vary. When it starts gaining weight, it's complete.
Okay, thank you. We are a research core, and we receive large pieces of human spine, 3 inches by 2 inches and by 1 inch thick. The investigator does the fixation and decalcification. Some samples are fine, but others are awful. What can we recommend as the time for the fix and decalcification?
Okay, so that's a tough one. But you did say research, correct?
Correct, research core. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in that case, we have the option. I don't know if this is something that you can do, but I tell people that their samples must be able to fit into a mega cassette. In the beginning, I understand that's not always an option. So in the beginning, once a sample is fixing, that might not be possible. So you would put it in a container where you could have a 1:20 ratio of neutral for formalin, and then fix for at least 3 days, especially if they're large. These are very large samples. And then when it comes to decalcifying, this is where we decalcify for a week, and then I say to my people, okay, you've given me this large femoral head. Now you need to cut it down and make it so it decalcifies, because if the larger the sample, all it's going to do is decalcify on the edge. It's not going to, in the center, it won't be decalcified the same as it is on the edges. So I just make sure that they fix for 3 days, they decalcify for 7, then we gross and we go from there, and you'd have to do a weight test to see exactly when it was completely decalcified, but that's what we would do.
Excellent, thank you. You have certainly generated lots of questions. Do you have any experience with fish and decalcification?
No, I do not. But if you would like to send me an email, My contact information is there. I would be happy to try and help you find out about fish and steer you in the right direction of someone you could speak to that could help you.
Thank you, Sarah. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let me put up your email address again. There we go. So if you would like to jot that down, then Sarah will be happy to get back to you. Thank you for doing that, Sarah.
You're very welcome.
And we'll move to our next question. Could you give some more details about oxalate ammonium, the oxalate ammonium test?
That is in the handout, I believe. Well, it's not a handout, but It is in one of the slides at the end of the presentation, which will be available to you. If not, email me and I'll send that information to you. Just ask specifically for the oxalate test and I can send it to you.
Correct. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And next, have you ever decalcified samples from non-human primates? If so, how long do you need to decalcify? Is there a way to expedite this process?
I am very sorry. I have not done anything with non-human primates. If you want to email me that question with your contact information, I can see if there's anybody that is in the field that I know of that would be able to help you with that.
Excellent. And actually, Peter here at Whitehead is going to put your email address into the chat box. So for those of you who do have questions, there you go. Thanks, Pete. You can copy and paste Sarah's email and use that to send your questions in. So again, thank you for sharing, Sarah. How would you decalcify? Okay, thanks. How would you decalcify teeth for sectioning?
Depends on what kind of teeth you're talking about. We did we did a study with dog teeth, and we decalcified them with formic acid for a long time, I believe. I can't remember exactly, but there's also books available through the National Society of Histotechnology that have some suggestions for decalcifying time. That, again, it depends on exactly what kind of teeth, how long they would decalcify for, and even what process you would use. There's a lot of variables to that question.
Okay, good. Thank you. What commercial EDTA solution do you recommend? Well, we don't want to actually have product recommendations, so let's move to the next one. Have you ever used a fixative with EDTA in it?
I actually have not. I do know that many people use that. We don't.
Okay, thanks. We are a research facility and use EDTA and post-fix with formal saline. We use the weight method as well. Unfortunately, we have bigger samples of rat paws, and it takes longer, up to 8 weeks. We use lower concentration of EDTA at 5.5%, and we will try the 14% as you recommended. Thanks again. Just more of a comment than a question. So.
Oh, that's great. You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Are there any chemical methods to test for the endpoint of decalcification with EDTA? We're working on whole adult zebrafish.
There is. I didn't put it in your handout. If you email me, I can send you information on the chemical endpoints for EDTA as well.
Okay, thank you. We are just, the questions are just rolling in. This is terrific. Well done, Sarah. How can we explain the good results for IHC? The temperature 4 degrees of C in EDTA, and how long must it be for the bone marrow samples? If that's not clear, we'll just move on. Do you want me to try that again?
You can move on.
Okay. According to your presentation, for a mouse knee decalcification, the best protocol should be 3 days with fresh 4% PFA and 14 days with 14% EDTA glacial acetic acid with a pH of 7.3 to 7.6. Is that correct?
No. We do, and I won't say it's the best. It's the best in our hands, but it might not be in your hands. What we do in our lab is we do on a mouse hind limb, as long as it grows right, with the proximal and distal end of the hind limb cut off, and you know, you have to have some tissue remaining around the joint. Grow, or if they're grossed well, like I said, affixed for 3 days in 10% neutral buffered formalin, changing the solution every day. Then you can put your sample into a 14% EDTA, pH that's 7.6 or 7.3 to 7.6 for about 7 days, changing the solution every 5 days. You don't want to do a 14-day decalcifying time in that solution.
Okay, thank you. Here's an interesting question. Have you ever decalcified cochlea? If so, what's the best way to do this?
I have not. I'm sorry. I have no idea.
Okay. Could you give us any more details about the oxalate ammonium test?
That, if you email me, I'll make sure that you get that protocol. It should be in the back of the slideshow here from Leica.
It is, and also Peter has put Sarah's email address into the chat box, so I've gotten some requests for it. Just look in the chat box right above where you typed, and you'll be able to copy and paste. Sarah's email address, and I'll ask Peter to put it in one more time into the chat box to make that a little bit easier for you. And we have enough time here for maybe one, maybe two more questions. So here is one. Our lab mostly works with bone metastasis samples, and we are interested in genomic alterations. We usually use 14% EDTA, but sometimes that will not soften samples, and we switch to 5% nitric acid. Which decalcification agents do you recommend for genomic studies?
That's a tricky question to answer. I think that EDTA is great, but if you need to get your samples in and out quicker for larger samples, then you're going to want to use an acid-based decalcifying agent. And for genomic testing, you don't want something that's going to sit around and destroy your samples. So I'm not sure exactly. We don't do that work. So all I would say is that you're going to want something that is going to allow your sample to come in and out quicker.
Okay, good. Thank you. Really quickly now, what are the important points of using infant samples for decalcification process?
Can you repeat that, Rick? I'm sorry.
Sure can. What are the important points to remember when using infant samples for the decalcification process?
Well, the most important process to decalcifying anything is just you need to know what you want to see in the end, and that's a tricky question too. What your end result is going to be. What I see a special stain. It depends. I really don't know exactly how to answer that question.
Yeah, that is a tricky question. And the other side of that is we are just about out of time. We've reached our scheduled stop time. So I'd like to thank you, Sarah, for all of this phenomenal information. And one of the questions was, how do we get to see these questions again? The recording will be available to you in a few days, and I'll explain all of that now. But I just wanted to say thanks again, Sarah, for a wonderful presentation and all of these terrific answers to all of these great questions. Let me just remind everyone, you bet, let me remind everyone that if you would like to contribute to Pathology Leaders with an article or a webinar presentation, then please be sure and let Eric Heilman at Leica Biosystems know about that. Here's his email address. And Peter has put that into the chat box. Thank you very much, Pete. And also, if you'd like to receive, or if you'd like to see the recording, many of you, I'm sure, will want to review this recording. It will be posted here. Peter will put that into the chat box as well, so you can copy and paste that. If you'd like to receive PACE credit for today's session or Florida Laboratory credit, here's how that'll work. When you leave the session and close the event window, you'll see the evaluation open in your browser. Fill it out, send it right in. If we have it within 24 hours, you should have your certificate of attendance within 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, it can take up to 2 weeks to receive your certificate, so send the evaluations in right away. Also, you'll be receiving your certificates of attendance via email, a link in an email, so keep an eye out for that, and you can check your junk email box in all of your inboxes for any emails from Susanna.import or Peter.import@whiteheadcom.com, and I'm sure that they will be there very soon. Also, if you're the person who has logged in for your group today, watch for an email, which is coming in about a minute or so, from Messenger at WebEx. It will have the it will have the URL for the evaluation in it. So forward it to everyone who joined with you so that they can access their evaluations and get their credit as well. And if you joined us from a mobile device today, watch out for the email from messenger@webex.com, because once again, your evaluation will not appear when you close the app on your phone or tablet. So keep an eye out for that email. And again, certificates of attendance will be sent via email within a few days if we receive it within 24 hours. If you'd like to have any of your questions that you didn't get answers to, you can send them to Eric Heilman at Leica Biosystems. Peter has put that into the chat box, so again, you can copy and paste that. We hope that you'll join us in March for From Magic to Molecules, the Intelligent Microscope, also presented by Leica Biosystems through the Pathology Leaders webinar series. And our presenter will be Dr. Clive Taylor, Professor of Pathology at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of California. So again, a big thanks to you, Sarah, for a wonderful presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet, and a big thanks, as always, to our friends at Leica Biosystems for providing this wonderful Pathology Leaders webinar series. We thank all of you for joining us and hope that you'll join us again very soon. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you very much, Sarah, for a terrific presentation. Bye-bye, everyone.